Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Secrets of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I am your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I greatly appreciate you spending some time with us. These podcasts, we hope to explore issues that touch us and our families in light of the revolution in longevity that is reshaping our Jewish world, and we appreciate your support. You can follow us and listen to previous podcasts by going to our website, jewishsacredaging.com, as well as visiting us on the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. It is with great pleasure that we welcome back a returning veteran to the microphone of Seekers of Meaning, Rabbi Shmuly Yanklowitz, the head of the Valley Beit Midrash in beautiful, balmy Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona. How you doing, Rabbi Shmuly? Nice to be with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rabbi Address. Great to be with you again. Thank you.
It's nice to hear your voice, and it's probably a lovely 60 degrees in Phoenix right now, and just springtime.
105, a lovely 105 spring day.
I'm sure everybody's out running around and just going crazy. But thank you. We want to talk about a recently published CCAR press book called Jonah, a social justice commentary. This is a great book. And since we're only, let's say, July, August, about 3 months from the high holidays, if we have high holidays, this becomes even more important because Haftarah Jonah on Yom Kippur afternoon, this great book filled with all kinds of interpretations and passion and questions, lots of great questions that speak to us. Before I get into why did you, and I know your background and for full disclosure, people who are regular listeners to Seekers of Meaning, Shmuly did a podcast with us last year on his previous book on Pirkei Avot, also focusing on social justice. Why did you pick Jonah, Shmuly? It just occurred to you. Why Jonah as opposed to something else?
You know, Jonah is a figure so commonly invoked and yet so commonly misunderstood or not explored in depth. And it is so accessible in that it's only 48 verses. As one of the 12 minor prophets, so well known, he is so relatable, so relevant, and not just to Yom Kippur, but every day. And I was so fortunate to work with CCAR Press again. I love working with that team. And I thought it was an amazing opportunity on a personal, selfish level to be able to add depth to my own Yom Kippur and Jonah relationship. And I really did feel that actually it doesn't bring out the normal ethical social justice messages, but it gives us the opportunity to explore some new themes.
So is I always pictured, and in my study and in my teaching of Jonah, he's every man. He just really represents every human being. He's faced with a challenge. He's called. He has an opportunity to rise to some great and he gets on a boat and gets the hell out of town. So
yes.
Talk to me about that. Is he every man?
Yeah, it really does seem to me that one of the top 10 common themes to the human enterprise is fleeing, that we flee from ourselves, we flee from God, we flee from our responsibility, we flee from reality. And there's a whole bunch of psychological and sociological factors as to why that's the case. And yet Jonah is so strange of a choice to be a prophet, because we think of the prophet who is called and immediately rises and says, Ayeka, and says, Hineni, I'm here. What do you want me to do? This notion that Jonah is us. We're called by our parent to dinner and we say, 1 more minute, mom, 1 more minute while we run out the back door to go play more ball, you know?
The fascination of this, and actually, it's very funny that you mentioned that with the parents and everything, because every kid has done that. Not only kids, married folk do it too. You know, your wife calls, you say, "Yeah, I'll be there in a minute. I'll be there in a minute." As if, or it's like going the invitation to the dreaded cocktail party when you try to flee for self-survival. One of the worst inventions of the human race, the cocktail party, at least for rabbis.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
what do you do? I'm a rabbi. Oh, well, thank you very much. You know,
yeah.
in the book, you talk about, you allude to what you call the Jonah Complex, which is fascinating to me. You relate it to Maslow's hierarchy, and I wanted to explore this with you because from our own experience, from your experience as a clergy person in the community and working with people, it seems to me that there are people who, when faced with a challenge or the opportunity for success, they run, and they would rather play the victim, and because it's a safe identity, rather than accept responsibility, uh, knowing that what they're called to do may fail, and that would perhaps reinforce a concept of failure. Could you talk a little bit about how you view that what you call the Jonah complex in the book?
Yeah. So if we know anything from Tanakh, it is that the word of God is a promise of success. That if you are called upon to be a prophet, that you have pretty good insurance policy as to the path forward. You think of Moses afraid to speak, and yet God's assurance that it will work out as a path to redemption. And so, why would Jonah run, knowing that God is with him? Um, and yet we see Jonah not running from the fear of failure we talk about so much, but as you mentioned, this Jonah complex in Maslow, that running from success, and I think as you said so well, this comfort within a safe identity. That a different identity, positive, negative, anything different, that change is scary, loss is scary, and that happens throughout our ages in life. We're confronted with new demands to change, and some of them provide enormous opportunities of what we would identify superficially or authentically as success, and yet we find strangely in the human condition those who flee from it. And I think that we can identify this within ourselves. What is the success I'm striving for? And what are my barriers there? And is that another dimension of how Jonah is within me?
You know, you start the book. You start the book. The book of Jonah starts as well. Uh,
Yeah.
um, and it occurred to me when I was reading it, and I want to thank you because I actually, in all the years we've done this, we've read the book and other commentaries. It starts with "Go at once." Go at once to
Mm.
the city. Okay. And I'm just thinking, it occurred to me as I'm reading this for this podcast, God's to me, go right now, drop what you're doing, just go. And people sometimes, I guess, don't react well to the imperative, the actual go. Not right now, drop what you're doing and go. Well, why? Wait a minute. What's going on here? And then it occurred to me, well, go back to Lech Lecha, when God says, right, to Avram, go, Lech Lecha, go. And he goes. And Jonah says, not so fast. What? Um, when you were interpreting this, when you were going through this, did that first line, that opening, "Go at once," did it hit you with anything? I'm just anxious, colleague to colleague, or did it touch anything with you as to what people, when they get an emergency, how they react to it?
Absolutely, absolutely. That within these emergencies, we have these various layers of response, affectively and cognitively, spiritually, and itself already an imperative emerging from outside of ourselves is something that feels so intrusive, invasive. We're living our life, and then a demand emerges upon us, especially in American society where freedom of choice is such a high value. Who is anyone to tell me to go? We're an individualistic society where I will make my own choice, determine my own manifest destiny, and yet in what ways is an authority-driven morality harmful? And in what ways do we embrace, in a more healthy fashion, some notion of moral authority that when we hear the demand of go, that we are in fact prepared based upon not only our conscience and our intuition, but our prior intellectual deliberation that when this moment emerges that I'm called upon, I'll be ready.
You know, it just occurred to me, Shmuly, that because we're living in such bizarre times, and we are recording this a month ahead of time when it posts, and we're still in the my prediction level. I try to stick to sports, but probably we're still going to be dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic in June.
Yeah.
And we're faced with, at one time, in one sense, the scientists saying, "Go at once, shelter in place. This is you can't ignore this." And other messages saying, "No, go ahead. States are opening. Go to the restaurants, go to the beaches, etc., etc." Do you think, in any way, shape, or form, Jonah takes on an even, and I'm just playing with this now, so an even more important relevance because of how people respond to this pandemic?
Absolutely. Yeah. But I'm sorry, keep going.
No, I'm just interested because as we're playing with this, as we're talking now, it just as we're dialoguing, this just occurred. I'm just interested in your take on that.
Yeah, there's a few layers there. It's a great question. One layer is that Jonah exists in isolation throughout the book. Jonah is the master of social distancing. Social distancing from the Jewish people, from Nineveh, within the fish, even on the ship, he distances from the sailors.
Right.
He is the master of social distancing. And a negative read is that he's narcissistic, he's selfish. A more charitable read is that he is afraid. He feels unworthy. So that's definitely one dimension. Then there's this other dimension of realizing that actually, months ago, we struggled with how can we save lives? Do I donate to Africa? Do I donate my organs after my life? What does it mean to save a life? And today we're confronted with an opportunity like never before, with the easiest way to help save lives by responsibly removing ourselves from our social norms. We can actually save lives. And Jonah has the same opportunity, 120,000 lives of Nineveh that are in some ways up to his volition, up to his empowered choice as to how to relate to them. And it is very tempting to, going back to Maslow, to stay in our comfort zone and to pretend like every moment is no different than the past. But in fact, every moment is new, and a new opportunity and challenge comes with every moment. And Jonah's not prepared for that. Jonah wants to live in a world of the past. These are my enemies who want to destroy me. I can't relate to them charitably. And yet, how in the 21st century, where globally we're more interconnected than ever, do we not look at the world as an us-them? But we look at the world as an interconnected web where our actions affect everyone around us. Jonah is the most successful prophet in Tanakh, in that in only 5 words, he leads Nineveh to teshuvah, to a repentance, a reflection, a changing of their ways. And so too for ourselves, not only words, but inactivity, passivity, staying home and the like itself can save massive amounts of lives. And so it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of restraint. But we live in a new era, and for us to embrace that moment now, when God doesn't say go, but God says stay.
The fleeing aspect. You have this great passage in the book that relates to Ernst Becker's denial of death. And the idea, and I just wanted to explore with you because in a lot of the work we do in Jewish sacred aging, this idea of how do we, as we get older, confront our own mortality. And American society still flees from it, and a lot of people flee from it. And I'm just wondering what, if you could just unpack your own thoughts on that, because there's part of that interpretation of Jonah which says, as every man, we, rather than sit down and really confront what it means to die, we'd rather ignore it. We'll flee from that
Well,
reality.
you're the Rebbe on this. I'd rather hear your reflection first.
Nice job, nice job, Rabbi. Nice job, nice. Yeah, that's the old human relations 101. Answer by a question and the mirror technique. Yeah, nice try, dude.
No, but in this case, I'm actually quite serious. I really think I can't imagine what I would have to offer that you wouldn't have to offer your listeners. Maybe you want to take a stab first, and I can see if I have a commentary to add on it.
No, okay. I mean, you can do the Rashi.
Yeah.
When I read that, it really hit me, because not only American society still denies this, and I love the Becker book. It's a classic book.
Yeah.
But I think also one of the great challenges that we face is having people really do confront the reality the reality of our own mortality, because it's very painful. And I'd rather get on a boat. I'd rather do something else. And yet, part of this thing with the pandemic, we're already seeing this, by the way, is there's an increase with lawyers of people writing wills, revising their advance directives, and basically saying, this is a wake-up call. I'm not immortal, and I'm seeing too much of this. Maybe I really have to take a look at this. And I think Jonah is this concept of fleeing symbolically, I think, does to me speak to this idea that we hold on and we try to deny this death, the reality of our own mortality, as much as possible. And as people have talked about, when you go through this process and actually accept the fact that I am going to die, it becomes a spiritual moment, and transitioning individuals from search for material support to spiritual support. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jonah speaks to so many people, because on a not too deep level, we're all running from something. And I think part of that's why I liked you. I liked in the book when you link this thing to the Becker book, because it really brought home that this is a high holiday sermon in its own self. So that's what I was, off the top of my head thinking of when I read that book.
I love that. That's much better than anything I can say. It really feels to me like death can be easy for someone who's absolutely sure of Olam Haba, of this beautiful afterlife. Death can be easy for someone who feels everything is neatly packaged with their children. Death can be easy for someone who feels they absolutely completed their moral mission in this world, or for someone who feels this world is horrible and they want to escape anyways. But for most of us, it's not that easy. We don't have this perfect faith or vision of what is to come. Our relationships are not finalized. Our mission is not complete, and we have an ambivalent relationship to this world. And so it is very hard to let go of all that. And I do think Jewish wisdom has something different to offer than Eastern religions. Not to put that down, there's a lot of wonderful wisdom there, both in terms of how do we prepare for death while protesting death at the same time. We don't just accept death as good, and yet we prepare ourselves responsibly spiritually. And I love what you said about this transition from material success to spiritual depth, and we see that with the Kikayon with Yonah, in that he's still obsessed with this material comfort. One might suggest that he hadn't learned that particular lesson, and ironically, Nineveh, right next to him, who was the violent culture, learned it very quickly. And yet Yom Kippur is the time we read this, because there's no holiday more than Yom Kippur that we prepare for death. Traditionally, we wear white as if we were in our burial shrouds. We fast as if we were dead. We think of ourselves like angels, just immersed in prayer. The way we relate to the day as if it is not only a celebration of life, but an affirmation of our inevitable immortality, as you said. And so I think in this pandemic more than ever, this reminder that we are mortal, and that reality presents enormous opportunities for growth and for life transition.
You're known as a social justice advocate, etc., and the subtitle of the book, Jonah, is a social justice commentary. And you write in the book about, quote, "It is only when we recognize our ultimate responsibility to others that we are able to become our true selves," unquote. How does Jonah reflect this? Does Jonah accept, recognize his ultimate responsibility to others? I mean, he does go to Nineveh, but then you say he gets to the gourd and like, does he retreat? Does he fail in this mission?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's the black and white ideologies in the world which ignore all the nuance. And I think that we see that on the far right and the far left and all types of different camps who want to ignore the nuance. But I think that actually conflicts are very complicated to navigate when ideology is more murky. And I think, to give one example, everyone knows the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very complicated. Many people want to oversimplify it. But one way to frame the Israeli side of it is tensions between survival and justice. And when you live in a world where it appears, whether it's true or not, that your own survival and well-being is diminished by achieving certain types of peace or justice, it's very scary. And so too, Jonah is in a world where the enemy, as he sees it, Nineveh, is a population that is an enemy to the Jews and is quite capable of wiping them out, that broader empire. And so what does it mean to engage charitably with a population that poses a threat to you? So there's not an easy answer to that. And some say, oh, Jonah failed. He didn't care about these people. In fact, a lot of the Christian anti-Semitic writings say Jonah is the quintessential Jew. He just cares about Jews and doesn't care about Gentiles. But in fact, it's kind of complicated because he sort of feels like their success is going to lead to the downfall of Klal Yisrael. And so there's that theme, and there's a lot to say about that. And then there's the theme of forgiveness. This whole idea that Jonah ben Amittai, the son of truth, is more interested in emet, in truth, than in shalom or rachamim, in peace or mercy. And yet God seems to be emphasizing in the book, again, a Yom Kippur theme, the value of forgiveness, the value of second chances. This has to do with prison reform. This has to do with how we think about relationships and our tolerance towards others being imperfect, just as we are. And that really is deeply rooted in how we think of the just society and mistakes. We live in kind of a zero tolerance type of world, giving a lot of room to ourselves, but very little room to others. It's interesting. I think it was in the introduction where I talk about reading a book about Nineveh, and the guy next to me on the plane says, "That's my hometown," and he was an Iraqi refugee. And he started telling me all about his land and the way that they really related to Jonah. And so I think about the refugee, the person who's displaced, and themselves has a unique responsibility placed upon them. And so, but at the end, in the end, it's true, the lessons are not all learned from Jonah, although the themes that emerge, for example, on the boat, the sailors are the heroes, it seems to me, the ones who are totally reluctant to throw Jonah overboard, according to the Midrashim, at least, the rabbis' teachings, that Jonah wants to go to sleep and they'll do anything to collectively survive. And for us to realize today, when it comes to global warming, when it comes to global health, when it comes to global economies, and so much more, we are all on the same boat. The nation state model is not enough for us to realize that globally we're all connected.
Yeah, the pandemic and the whole aspect of public health and access to health. We're doing some work on that in our program. That really underscores exactly what you're saying. I mean, the whole public health challenge is being brought forth as a result of this crisis. You mentioned something, if I'm not mistaken, in the book. I would bet you many people perhaps overlook. How many women are there in the book of Jonah?
Yes, they're not there. They're not there.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that in the intro.
Why do you think that? Or do you have any thoughts on that, or just that's the way that's the way they wrote it? I mean,
Yeah,
why do you think that?
it is actually very rare, and usually, even in passing, positively or negatively, you look at the book of Proverbs, for example. You have the woman of folly, but you also have Eshet Chayil.
Right.
You look at all the books. Certainly, Genesis, I mean, is flooded with women's narratives
Oh,
in different ways, positive or negative. And so, I'll take one stab at an answer that I didn't give in the book that's emerging to me at this moment. That it's almost as if the book is screaming at men. The book is screaming at men who, I don't take any guess as to whether on the nature nurture debate, but at least stereotypically, and it resonates with my experience, that in some ways men are more committed to truth than compassion. Carol Gilligan, in one of her earlier books, in a different voice, talks about, and we can, people have challenged these studies, but how boys on the playing field will quit the sport. They'll quit the sport and the relationships involved in the interest of honoring the rules of the game as they see it, whereas girls will change the rules of the game they're playing to honor the relationships. Being relationship centered versus truth centered, and again, I don't want to embrace stereotypes as being innate to males and females, to boys and to girls. But in my experience, it does sort of resonate that women more naturally are forgiving, and are more can be more compassionate. And this notion of Jonah feels like almost a quintessential male. Just for example, there's a lot more men who flee from a child who's born than the mother. Fathers flee more than mothers, fleeing from the responsibility of parenthood. That's not to say that there's not wonderful men who are great parents, but men flee more often. For lots of reasons. As a foster parent myself, when we have parental visits, the visits have always, in our case, with our foster kids, been with the birth mother, not with the biological father. So these are complicated matters, but I do think that at the least it should charge us as men to think about our own misgivings in the Me Too movement and beyond around how we fail as males, but also for us to embrace more women's voices on how we understand the Jonah commentary, and I seek to do that in the book through the commentaries of women.
Yeah, it would be an interesting conversation. I'm just thinking about this on Yom Kippur afternoon on a shiur to unpack this from both a feminine and a masculine perspective, and point. I would imagine a congregation could have a lot of fun with that. I hope a lot of fun with that without too many people getting crazy on the afternoon of Yom Kippur. Now that you've had your fight, let's go in and pray. Almost like the B'nai Barak thing at the Seder. Okay,
right.
And you mentioned this, you allude to this about this idea of almost a theology of reincarnation with Jonah and the fish, the Leviathan, the whale, whatever it is, all the symbolism of into the womb, etc. Could you just how do you relate to that exile going back into the fish. Is it? I mean, there's a popular commentary that it's really the womb, and then he gets splurted out, as in birth, and he accomplishes ghosts in Nineveh. Talk to me about how do you relate to that symbolism?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, picking up on that last issue of gender, I do explore this idea of the fish being called dag and daga, that the fish is masculine and feminine,
And feminine,
as
right?
this womb where Yonah is reborn, is renewed, offering us the exciting possibility of refuge, of quarantine, if you will. Quarantine from a scary world is a problematic thing. And yet, even within that problematic nature, provides unique opportunities, like Shabbat, to have a cocoon experience away from normal life as we know it. And yet, I'm also interested, in addition to the spiritual notions of rebirth, which can happen and should happen in all the stages of our life. We talk a lot about emerging adulthood when people reinvent themselves, but as you know, in retirement, there's multiple layers of reinvention that can happen, and throughout our life, and the cycle of life, and then I explore theologically, as you mentioned, Gilgulim, the notion of reincarnation. I don't embrace this as an absolute commitment to a certain faith enterprise or eschatology or anything of the sort, but rather as a thought experiment of what does the model of reincarnation offer us. And I think one thing it offers us in a world of instant gratification, a society that wants quick gains in stock markets, quick likes on social media, quick pleasure, is the possibility of our soul or our existence being much longer than we can imagine it to be. That global warming matters not only because of my empathy for future generations, but because it's also me who will be here, right? This notion that there is oneness to all reality that we all participate in, and we never are removed from that. We were always here and will always be here, even though it might not seem like it was us. And this space of the fish, and of being given a new life, because he does seem like in many ways a new person when he comes out of the fish, although there's great debates about that. Is he the same person, or has he learned anything? That so too we can construct, and I think Judaism helps us with this, things like Shiva, however we embrace a mourning past, a process of an experience of grief after death of loved ones, how we embrace Shabbat or the high holidays, and how we build into our day times to be kovea itim, times to learn, to reflect. And I think this is one of the great challenges for the modern person, is how to slow down, how to create a fish experience where we can go on retreats from the reality as we know it. And after the pandemic, we don't return to normal. We return to a new world. And so too,
Right.
when we come out of the fish, we return to a new world, and we are active partners in reconstructing a new world.
So before we run out of time, and I do thank you, and again, we're speaking with Rabbi Shmuly Yanklowitz from Valley Beit Midrash in Phoenix, the Phoenix area, Phoenix, Scottsdale, and his new book, Jonah, a social justice commentary, published by the CCAR Press. It's available at all qualified bookstores through the CCR Press and the great God Amazon, which answers your talking about immediate gratification. Push a button and it shows up, which is changing society. I mean, there's a whole high holiday sermon in that, but not for right now.
Mm-hmm.
You spent a lot of time with Jonah, Shmuly. So, last question: would you like to have dinner with him?
um, it's very interesting that you say that, because when people normally ask the question, "Who would you want to have dinner with?" or in our sukkah, we always talk about the ushpizen, and we ask every sukkah, every year in our sukkah, we ask our guests, "Who would you want to invite into the sukkah tonight?" And most people suggest great, quote unquote, great people who really changed the world. And yet, I do think that both in terms of friendship and mentorship, I have often looked not towards those who were unreachably, inaccessibly, um, um, uh, overqualified in their abilities of self-sacrifice and consistent commitment to excellence. But those who seemed to be most like me, struggling with the things I was struggling with, grappling with the things I was grappling with. And so Jonah doesn't feel like the hero whose soul you're in awe of studying, but like a friend who you can relate to and whose challenges you would want to understand how he processed them. And so Jonah is exactly who I want to have dinner with, to understand his fear and anxiety, to understand his depression and isolation, and to understand his own relief and triumph. So I appreciate the question. I never thought of it in that way.
Well, just don't serve fish.
Don't worry, we don't serve fish in our house. But yeah, it is a good idea. I'm not quite sure how he'd relate to that.
That's exactly the point. Shmuly, thank you very, very much. This is great. Good luck with the book. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay cool out there in Phoenix.
I always love your humble and wise questions, and it's a great honor to have this smallest participation in your amazing podcast. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it very much. Take care, man. Just stay well and good luck.
All the
best.
Luck. All the best.
Take care. And thank all of you again for listening to this edition of Secrets of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. A reminder that you follow us on our website, jewishsacredaging.com, the Facebook page on Jewish Sacred Aging, as well as the special Facebook page, Jewish Sacred Aging Podcast. And if you'd like to make a tax-free donation to help further our work, please go to the website and click on the donate icon. And for suggestions and comments, just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. These podcasts are recorded at the studios of Lubetkin Global Media in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And thank you to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, thanks for being with us. We look forward to greeting you on the next Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. Todah and Shalom.